right now. So it is recording now. So let's make a formal introduction for our listener. Good afternoon, Luke. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Luke Seomore accepted our invitation to our show. Luke, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk
Totally,
to you.
man. So tell me, with everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic, the virus, people not receiving the vaccine, no shows, inability to go out, how you manage mentally your work, your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first, because I'm in London and we're on like the third lockdown. The first one was the hardest, I think, for getting your head around it and understanding it. But now there's a little bit, and that was obviously just for everyone a bit of a bleak time in humanity, as it were. But now it does feel like there's a little bit more light. We're kind of basic creatures. I think when the seasons change, that helps us a lot. And spring's coming, and there's a vaccine, so there is some kind of hope. But it's been. I've got a kind of 2-year-old son, so he's going to have his his third birthday soon, and his second birthday was in a lockdown as well. So for him, it's just like he's just accepted it. It's amazing how kids are quite versatile. But it's been hard, and I actually got COVID last year, so I've kind of seen every little aspect of it. But looking forward to getting out there.
When will it start opening up in London? Because it's still the majority of the show were canceled, right? So
yeah, I think from the mid-April, the cafes and the pubs are going to be opening, and then I think it's May, the cinemas, and maybe some venues with outside spaces, and then it's the indoor, like the clubs, as in nightclubs, are going to be like June-ish time. So it's like gradually opening up. But I was walking past a woman the other day, and she was talking about her 15-year-old daughter, and I think if you're 15, she was telling the story of like how the kids said to her, like, "It's all right for you, mum. You had your your year as being a 15-year-old. I didn't." And it's kind of interesting to see that generation, such a transitional moment, and they've kind of lost that time. So it's kind of interesting and intense to experience that. But things are starting to open up again, and it'll be great to see live music and go to galleries and get back into the cinema, because that's obviously been missed greatly.
Absolutely, man. Were you born like in a musical family when you began playing keyboard, piano, that kind of stuff?
Not really. There was no one in my family that played music at all, and I remember my granddad bought me a little Spanish guitar, and then my dad, who's like massively into music but not very musical, he tuned it, but he didn't really know how to tune it, so he just broke all the strings. And I remember the guitar being in the little half-size Spanish guitar. The guitar was always in the corner of the room without any strings. And then when I was about 14, 15, I started to play, and the first time I ever played outside is there was an oxygen tank that my sister used to go in to get extra oxygen for a disability, and there was a kid in there who was autistic, but his mum was claustrophobic, so his mum didn't want to go into this, like, it's like a small little metal container, and the pressure intensifies and the oxygen is increased, and it's good. Sports athletes go in there to heal quicker, and it's good if you've got any kind of helps the brain. And so the kid was autistic and get really stressed out being in this tank, and his mum was too claustrophobic to be in there. So I'd play guitar to try and calm him down, and that was the first time I've ever like played in front of people. And then since then I started to play. I played in some bands, but I didn't really make music I thought was any good. To a certain degree, there was nothing that I felt I wanted to get out, and it was only until I started writing soundtracks to the films that myself and my filmmaking partner Joseph Ball. That's when it felt like I was creating my own world, and I was creating my own sounds, and that kind of fed into the musical project.
And then did you go to after the equivalent of high school, any university where you took classes and composition?
Not I remember early on, there was like a guitar teacher I visited, and he was quite like a quite good character. And I remember he always had these exceptionally long nails, and now playing guitar, I understand why. And he gave me a couple of lessons, but it was fairly kind of like informal. And I remember playing guitar on like a station. It was a little place in Essex, which is kind of like east of London, like a small town. And these two guys walked past, and he looked at me and went, "Yeah, give up, mate." And I remember that kind of the kind of character I am. That kind of made me not want to ever give up. But I never really had. It was just I'm just kind of self-taught, and I don't know if that's inspired how I make stuff, but the simplicity of things is something I'm kind of drawn to, and I kind of started getting into minimalist, playing, stuff like Velvet Underground or Steve Reich, or those kind of things which had that, or the Fool had that repetition, or Neu, the German band, had that repetition simplicity, which kind of captured my imagination. That's kind of how I started to play in this kind of repetitive looping kind of way. But I never really kind of formally trained. It was just, if I needed a certain sound, I just learned in a kind of rudimental way how to play something, and then built upon that.
Yeah. What kind of, but at the time when you were, finishing the equivalent of high school here, what bands were you listening to at the time? What was popular band that you listened to?
Yeah, it was kind of the 90s, mid 90s. There was, bands like Oasis and all those. For a kid coming from like a working class background, there was, before, there's the manufactured pop of the 80s, and this was a time when bands like Nirvana or Oasis or My Bloody Valentine, Primal Scream started coming about, and bands like Spiritualized, they were the kind of bands I was listening to, and I always would like obsessively get in the magazines and read what kind of bands they were into, and then you'd hear about Bitches Brew, or you'd hear about Tangerine Dream, or Can, or Miles, like Miles Davis, and you'd hear about all these amazing musicians that inspired them, and that kind of opened it up. It was kind of like pre-internet, so those were the kind of bands that were like opening me up. And there was a Scottish band called Mogwai who started around that same time, who were a kind of instrumental band who were influenced by they were like a noise rock, post-rock band, which they're still going now, but they were quite something that kind of really excited me as someone leaving school. They started off around that time, mid to late 90s.
And then were you at the time, were you buying a lot of, I don't know, soundtracks, these? Or?
Yeah, I remember one of the first things I really kind of got into was my uncle brought back, part of my family is Scottish and on my mum's side, and he went off to Dallas in the 80s, and then he'd come back from the States and bring us stuff. I remember him bringing a cassette of the Blade Runner soundtrack, and I remember playing that a lot. And I remember, like, I was pretty young at that point, but I remember thinking that was really amazing. I bought soundtrack. There was a Canadian band called Godspeed You Black Emperor. I remember like vividly buying that CD, and that was like, I couldn't believe how amazing that was. And again, going to buy Brew, and then also there was a lot of kind of like strange hip hop at the time as well. A guy called Dr. Octagon was releasing these really interesting albums. So it was quite like a mixture of things that I was buying. And as I started to study, I left school and studied art in East London. You're open up to all the amazing kind of record stores, and so that was like another kind of like finding out about.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Blade Runner soundtrack from the first one. I think it's from '92. That was that was an unbelievable movie as well. You know, way Blade Runner was, you know, Vangelis was very well known, but the movie itself was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's there's still it's interesting how it still sounds kind of quite fresh.
Oh
You know,
yeah,
you could put
yeah.
that soundtrack onto a film now, and people are, oh, this is an amazing soundtrack. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful soundtrack.
And the movie as well. You know, even
Yeah.
if the music, the film score wasn't that great, right?
Yeah,
The movie is unbelievable. Very, very well done. I mean,
yeah. That's it's an amazing. That I mean, that was. I remember watching that and getting into. There's a Russian filmmaker called Andrei Tarkovsky, and watching Blade Runner and watching Solaris, which is like an amazing existential sci-fi film. But they kind of occupy the same space in my mind in those big, expansive worlds with those kind of like otherworldly scores, which are just incredible.
at the time and so when was the point? And I'm sorry, hopefully they're doing some construction here in the second floor of the house, so hopefully it won't be too loud, man. And at the time when you finished high school, your early 20s, is that when you decided that you wanted to be a musician? That was, you know, you
Yeah,
didn't know that film scored yet, but you knew that that kind of my art in a way, my area. That's
yeah. We started making art installations and documentaries, and it was when I put music through imagery, it started to make sense, and it started to have an identity, and it all kind of fell into place really. And I've always kind of wanted to play music, and I was kind of slightly, I just like playing music in my bedroom, but I had an ambition for it, but the music I was creating wasn't that amazing. So it was only when I started making films and making music to accompany them that the music started having its own identity. So it was leaving university, early 20s was when I started to kind of really take it seriously. Really.
you remember the first film or short film that you guys put together, and what was the reaction on the media? Yeah.
The first kind of film we did was a film called Lost and Found, and it was about, we read about this guy who knew, it happens less now because this the way that society is set up, but he was born, he was born illegitimately. His mum abandoned him. He was born in a field, and he was brought up by a traveling community, and he never had any documentation for his life. So he worked just on building sites and just did manual labor. And then he got ill when he was in his 60s. So he went to the doctor to get treatment because he had no birth certificate, no, social security number or anything like that. It was as if he didn't exist. So we made this film, and we used the idea was we were going to use stock footage. There was a guy called Umit in East London who had this amazing archive of Super 8 film that he collected from all different parts of the country. And so we used those Super 8 memories of other people to illustrate this guy's life. And then I did the score. And the Edinburgh Film Festival, and that was quite amazing to see your film on the big screen and hear the sound. It was kind of I think people found it kind of quite emotional because this guy had the other thing that happened as well. When we went to interview him, he was at a kind of drop-in center for people who are homeless, and the women there were talking to us, and they were like, "Oh, the paparazzi here." They were kind of joking, and then they said, "Oh, he hasn't got a tongue." And again, we thought they were kind of still joking, even though it's slightly kind of dark humor. But we didn't know that, because the reason why he took time off work is because he had cancer and he had to have his tongue removed. So the whole interview we did with him was really hard to decipher because he only didn't have a tongue. So then there was also a part of the documentary about transcribing what he was saying, because what he was saying was quite unclear. And there was only some quite poignant bits we worked out right near before the film was supposed to be going to the film festival we put in there. So that it was a kind of really interesting project, and it was that kind of good cross section of it. It was like art, fine art approach, but it was a documentary about a real person, so it gave it kind of soul. And the score, because it was all the different elements of his life, the score could go into different places. At points it was like this kind of quite industrial music, and then other points it was more this kind of evocative, beautiful music when he was talking about his childhood, which in his eyes was quite a happy childhood.
And then what was how difficult was to compose the music, and then from the film, and then what was the reaction on the market? I mean, when you guys presented that particular film.
Yeah, I found the music quite easy. I just, with Joseph, just started writing it in little pieces, and then as we put it to the imagery, it started to really work. It was music I'd already written, so half it was music already written, so we placed it in there. I started writing new stuff, and then the film went around the world. It played in a lot of different festivals, and that was quite interesting, seeing the different cultural differences, how people, maybe a country which was a bit more social issues were taken more seriously, or had more funding in a way, that they saw it in a different way to another country. So it was interesting to see the different reactions from different countries, and because it was all subtitled, because you couldn't understand it, it was kind of like actually quite universal, because they didn't have to necessarily know the language. But yeah, it was a great. It was like Edinburgh Film Festival. It premiered, and a lot of people, I think, were quite moved by it, which was amazing to see.
And that will lead you into what film after that? So, because once you started, right, and you presented a festival and the people like the music, like me on the radio, little by little you start increasing the reputation a little bit.
We did. That was just 15 minutes. Then we did a feature documentary called Isolation, which was about a guy called Stuart Griffiths, who was in the British Army, served in the 90s in Northern Ireland. Then he was going to either go to, what happened with him was he was in Warrington, Manchester in the 80s. At that point in England, there wasn't a lot of opportunities if you were a young kid from that part of the country. And he started, nicking cars, and got to a point where he got arrested for stealing a car. And his mum gave him a bit of an ultimatum. It's like, you can either just do this in a prison or do something. And going to the army was one of the few options he had. So he joined the army, but then kind of quite quickly became disillusioned by his time serving in Northern Ireland, and started taking photographs almost to document his time in the army. And then, eventually he couldn't really take the idea of, he questioned why the army had, why were the army in Belfast? And they always say, your job is not to ask questions. And so eventually he left, and then he left the army and became homeless. And we found out that his story was quite a good kind of paradigm of what happens to a lot of soldiers of leaving the army, which is a very regiment, but a very kind of extreme existence in some ways, and then adapting to civilian life. And so the film was about his life, but it was also about him talking to, this was 2007, 2008 when we were making it. So Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts were in the news quite a lot, but there wasn't really, at that point, it wasn't really much about veterans or modern veterans in the UK. So it was about his life, and it was about all those service people, adapting to regular life, and talking about post-traumatic stress. And the interesting thing was, we talked to a guy called Simon Brown, and we said, why did you join the army? And the reason he said he joined the army is because it's like, he said, for the safety, which we didn't really think. We're not from a military background. No one was in our family was from a military background. So it was like, we went into it open mind. And it was kind of interesting to hear that actually, because someone looked after you to a certain degree, they gave you a bed, they gave you your food, you were looked after within society. But then there was another side of your existence in the army, which was quite kind of perilous. So we made that film with Stuart and shot it him moving around the country interviewing other veterans, and because he was a veteran himself, these veterans would open up quite quickly, and so a lot of it is the filmed conversation of these people. That was kind of the idea, rather than the filmmakers or the musicians behind the project talking to the subject. It was someone who had, you know, an empathy with them, and as soon as he asked them where they served and he told them where he served, they just were a lot more open. Even though there was a small kind of camera crew there, they were a lot more open, and it was kind of quite moving to see them talk about their lives and explain how things have kind of unfolded. So we made that film, and then we started to do some live scores. So I composed the music, but then I would play a live version of the music accompanying the film. So the first time we did a live version of that was in Jersey. There's a Jersey Film Festival, and it was the War Tunnels, which is an interesting place because the War Tunnels was one of the few kind of occupied places within the British Isles. And originally they were going to stockpile all their military, you know, a lot of the armory in these tunnels. But as they started losing the war, it was a hospital. And then it's a historical place, and then it's like a big cavernous, you know, tunnel, and we played in there, and the acoustics in there are quite strange, so it had quite a interesting effect on how we played. It sounded very big and very bassy, but it was quite an amazing experience to play that live and have the film playing at the same time. And from then we played in the Barbican, the Roundhouse, and we had a kind of small tour of those with myself and Michael Garrett and David Stevens, two other musicians, and we toured around the country and playing different cinemas and kind of live, you know, art house, cross between art house, cinema, and live music venues across the UK.
Gotcha, man, that's a beautiful experience. I did have let's talk a little bit about the films, the albums. I had the opportunity to buy the 3 CDs or the equivalent EPs that I found on Bandcamp. One is I think the first one was one from April 18, 2020, which is called The Limitless Sweet Love of Precious Suffering. Man, that's well done name, but it's a beautiful album, man. How that came together, man.
So that was something that was part. I started doing, you know, on the films, you'd make a lot of field recordings of, because you go to interesting spaces to make the films, and I just carried on like building a library of field recordings, and I used a lot of those to make that album. So the field recordings, I started mutating those and slowing them down, and then playing, you know, bass and guitar and piano, and then morphing those as well. And the idea of that was, a lot of the recordings I got were these abandoned spaces. You know, there's an interesting thing which is the kind of one of the ideas behind the work is like the edgelands. The edgelands, has been books written about it. The edgelands is where the urban part of a city or a town melts into the countryside, and there's a weird little zone where it's not really a city anymore, and it's not really the countryside, and it's that kind of, it's called the edgelands. And we visited a lot of those places to do some of the filming, and I got a lot of field recordings of those places, and those places have a kind of a haunting quality to them, but they're also kind of, because they've got the countryside there, that there's a kind of a beauty and a warmth to it. So that was the idea, that these kind of like empty spaces, I wanted to try and in the music create something quite emotional, because then they're not in a way that emotional because there's no human beings there. So I wanted to try and get this idea of like quite emotional, evocative music from these quite kind of uninhabited spaces.
And then so when you visit those places, where were you went there to get ideas, or you were kind of recording the stuff in kind of abandoned warehouses or parks or.
Sometimes we'd be going there to look to maybe film there, and then and then because we started finding these places, I just sometimes go there just to make a field recording. At that point, I didn't really know exactly what it's for, and then when I started getting the music together, the idea for the album started to form. But it was always making those recordings was always just a way of kind of, I guess, in the same way people take photos on their phone. It was this way of documenting experiencing these places, and until the kind of like first lockdown, when I had a bit of extra time, that I started to form them into that album.
I got you. The other one that I listened was I woke up and forgot what happened.
Yeah,
that was another. I think to me that you are very picky in the name that you use. It's not an accident that you pick this word and the love, right?
Yeah. No, picking the names. I mean, with instrumental music, I think sometimes it's good to have like names that are kind of memorable, because you haven't got the lyrics to.
That's right. Yeah.
To kind of capture the imagination. So sometimes it's good, but that's why on the second album, it's the first official album, Is My Destroy. That's I decided to try and get like a more simplified one, because to stop doing those longer ones. But I'm not. I do like those longer titles, but sometimes whenever you tell people, they never remember. That's the only draw.
That's right. So and then I listened to the whole Is My Destroy a couple of times, and it's a very 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 good album, man. It's like, I think in the stuff you send me, it's like a film without pictures, and so I listened to the whole album a couple of times when I was preparing for the interview. I didn't see the clip that you sent me as well in Vimeo, so I tried to imagine where the music could be applied to without knowing anything about the film, even if the film was done before and after or whatever. And it's a beautiful piece of music.
Oh, thank
very,
you.
very, very, very well done, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, you need to show the stuff around, man. I mean, Bandcamp, you can do much better. I mean, people go to Spotify to look for new artists or Bandcamp, but you have the possibility to play the music live and let it be known outside, small places or.
So the album was put out by a German label called Wagner, and it's on Bandcamp, but it is also you can listen to it on Spotify, and I think Apple is on there. So they did release it there, and I mean, in non-pandemic times, we would definitely be playing that live, and I think that's when you're a new act, those kind of live pieces are live performances are vital. Obviously, it's kind of quite hard now, but we're trying to get the word out, and appreciate your time and taking interest in it, and we're just trying to get it out there as much as possible. And when we have, when people do take notice, it's been a good reaction, and that album in particular I'm kind of proud of.
And then in order to make money in Spotify, you need to have whatever millions of listeners a month, but it's not the case here. But with respect to Spotify, you do okay in terms of sale. You're selling the stuff, people.
I mean, yes, but and I know I'm friends with some kind of bands that have got hundreds of thousands, millions of listens, and you still, even out of that, you don't. But I think the Spotify thing is stacked against anyone independent, because also the way they distribute the money is to the major labels. So unless you're with them, it's quite hard to monetize that. But I think Bandcamp is good because people know it's going directly to the artist. So you can, as an artist, that is a good way of supporting you. And I think that, again, if you're playing live, you can bring, we've got physical copies of the album. You can sell it. So I think that something like Spotify is quite good because it's open to anyone to get into there, and there is like free options. But I think if people want to support independent or new artists, then something like Bandcamp is good, because the money is predominantly going to the art. I think it's important that people who want to support independent artists go through those kind of routes. Rather, Spotify is great in getting it out there, but it doesn't really. You can't unless you're huge. It doesn't really give you revenue at all.
Yeah, there gotta be something in between. I'm quite sure that Spotify became popular about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and then Bandcamp came along, but they gotta be, Spotify is a ripoff for artists,
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think that there's you see that wave of anger really, since starting this project. Definitely seen that wave of anger for a lot of musicians, because it's not, it doesn't really serve the musicians at all. And it isn't. In some ways, it's amazing you get this catalog of music, but there's a lot of avant-garde stuff that's not on there that you can't find on there. So. And there's people like Jim O'Rourke, who is an amazing musician. A lot of his stuff isn't on there, which I quite like in a way, because it means that people have to find, it makes it a little bit more harder to find the music. But I think there'll be in the future, like, more independent created versions of Spotify, where there'll just be a small. I think there's even a company that started where it's a small group of musicians, and you have a subscription, and then from that your money goes to a small group of people, and they produce. You can only get the work through that. So I think that will come, but it's that kind of model is not
Yeah, but Bandcamp, right? Like you mentioned, I think they only take 7 or 8%. The rest go to the artists, and it's pretty good. It's very, very honor and honest system where
definitely.
Yeah, as opposed to Spotify. If I have the time and the energy, I will write a new version of Spotify and make it free for people.
Yeah, definitely.
To listen to them. Okay, I wanna bring your attention to 3 particular songs. In particular, one was, what can you tell me about? I woke up and I forgot what happened. How the composition came together.
That was. I said before, I got COVID. We were supposed to be doing some filming in the Middle East, and I managed, as we traveled over there, before the filming happened, I got COVID. So then we had to isolate in a room for 2 weeks. Like all I saw was like just on the edge of the desert, just the road going off into the distance. And it didn't affect me too. Like the first week, I didn't feel too great, but the second week, I was just kind of a bit bored and depressed sitting in this room all the time. But I started composing that track there, and we've all felt it a little bit in lockdown.